Right, so I'm going to start with just some like context building questions, and then I'm going to work into more like in-depth ones. So I wanted to start with a pretty basic one of how did you first get into just cartooning in general, and like what about it captured your interest?
Oh, when I was a kid, I was attracted by comics and cartoons. I grew up in Belgium, and magazines and newspapers were full of cartoons, mainly full of comics. But I was attracted by cartoons too because I loved humor, and I loved caricaturing, watching people caricatured, okay, in a funny way. And so I was always attracted, and I, as far as I remember myself as a kid, I drew. I was the artist of the class, and there was never a question, what will I do when I grow up? It was clear to me that I had a vocation and I will realize it. So at the beginning, I was first an illustrator, and it took me a few years to become a cartoonist, because to be a cartoonist, you have to be, let's say, involved into society. I was a new immigrant in Israel, okay? I emigrated between the age of 19 and 20. So it took me some years to become a part of what is happening in the society, and to find a platform, an opportunity to begin to cartoon. And since then, I did not stop.
So moving on to the pandemic, what would you say is the role of a cartoonist in the context of the pandemic?
Listen, actually, the role is the same. It does not matter if you live in a peace period, in a war period, in a conflict period, in a pandemic, or not. Actually, cartoonists, they are a sort of, I can say, gatekeepers of freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and have the right to criticize and to express their opinions. But during a pandemic, if we take the 1.5 years that passed, they had a very important role, because most of the people stayed home. Most of the people surfed the web. Most of the people had no opportunity to have other opinion than the official opinions, okay? Let's say the point made by the government and by the leaders. And all of us, we witnessed a situation where leaders were lying to their own people or telling half-truths. And I think that the cartoonist's role is to try to put light on the truth. I sometimes say that a pencil is like a torch. And with the torch, you try to enlighten, let's say, the dark sides of the media, and to tell the truth the way you understand it. Because a cartoonist, most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, they are independent. They are not his master's voice, okay? They work on their own. So sometimes cartoonists identify with the line of the newspaper they work in. But those who work independently, they don't depend on anyone. And I think we try to say our truth, and in the same time, we try to make some people at least smile, if not laugh, okay? To entertain somehow, to mock the situation.
I was just going to ask, in general, how do you think that cartoons can, you sort of touched on this, cartoons can reflect conflict situations?
I think that they express things that the spokesman of the governments or prime ministers or president don't express. They actually give, they show the life inside the conflict. Because when I live in Israel, okay, and this is a region of tension and conflict, as you know. So the way that I do my work from here on what is happening here, and I look all the time on both sides, to the Palestinian side and to the Israeli side, and I criticize both sides. It's in a way, I'm not doing a propaganda, Okay, I'm not trying to, let's say, to paint the situation in a positive way. I am the proof, me and my colleagues, okay, we are the proof that we live in democracy, that we can have opinions who disagree with our government policy, and we can express them. Okay, so for readers who see the region and who see Israel only through media, main media, which is internet and TV channels, if they also watch the cartoons, they understand there are different voices inside the countries, that 100% of the Israeli things like Netanyahu, or not 100% of the Palestinians in Gaza things like the Hamas. And only cartoonists, not only, but cartoonists are good to show it. They're a good example of, let's say, of a wealthy situation in which you still have the freedom to express, even though your leaders disagree with you, okay? I think it's very important. This is why when we meet among colleagues in the frame of Cartooning for Peace, that exists for a long time, already 15 years, we find a common language very, very easily. And I meet people from countries that are enemies, okay, of Israel, but they are not mine. They are not my enemies. I want to know the Iranian people. I want to know the Syrian people. And I know the difficulties in which cartoonists are living there to express themselves. I'm very lucky. I live in Israel as a cartoonist. And we have a lot to share. We have a lot in common. And we share the same hopes. This is the main thing that Cartooning for Peace brought to me. The fact that when I see the word, I see it also through the eyes of my colleagues in the different countries. And I have colleagues in tens of countries around the world, and a lot of them in countries that are considered enemies of Israel.
Thank you. I just wanted to return to COVID for a minute. You were talking before about how, for instance, leaders have lied to people and cartoonists have to react to that in their work. Which elements, if you had to pick one, of the pandemic do you think will gain the most attention from cartoonists?
What I saw was more critics about the leaders, about the policy of the different governments, the lack of coordination between the governments. The position of some of the leaders, Trump is one of them, Bolsonaro is another one. There were also critics on Johnson, okay? Prime Minister of your Prime Minister. There were also critics about what happened in China. Can we really lean on the figures that they give us? Do we believe what they say? And also on Russia, in Russia. There are still countries that are in a very, very bad shape, very bad situation. So I found myself drawing more leaders than average people. I also gave personality to the COVID itself, which was very easy to recognize, like, you know, a ball with those little sticks around. So that was an image all of us used to say pandemic, okay, to personalize the pandemic. And I personally had criticized a lot Netanyahu during all this, the way he dealt with this situation. He made political use out of it to keep himself in place, which at the end did not succeed. And he was one of the people I drew more during this period. That was a way to demonstrate. I also demonstrated in the streets, but not too much, because my place, let's say, I'm at my best when I'm behind my table, not in the streets. I'm a silent demonstrator. And I also had, personally, I lost my father in April 2020 of COVID. He was in a house for elderly people in Brussels. And on the same month, 13 people died, and he was one of them. So I also had a personal, some cartoon I did on him and for him. So that was a very special period, very special period. And I also watched what my colleagues did in the world. That was a way to communicate between us, because most of us were at home, unable to have a normal life, and our normal life is being at home. Even when there's no pandemic, we live at home and we work at home, most of us. So somehow it sounds funny, but in my day as a creator, it did not change the situation. Like people who had a workplace and they needed to work from home, or they lost their work. Okay, to me it was different. And I also began, like in all universities and colleges in the world, I began to teach by Zoom in April 2020. So in a way, the big change was my teaching, not my drawing. I met my students just on screen. And that was not so bad. That was a new way to meet them. And we tried, all of us, my students and myself, to take advantage out of this special situation. And it worked not bad, actually. And this is how I met Francisca and Simon Lambert by Zoom. I was supposed to come to Leicester. So there will be the world before the pandemic and after it. And it won't be negative to all of the people. Some people they took advantage of this experience, or they could take the positive side of it. Yes, this is at the beginning of the pandemic. I did it, as you see, in March 20, okay? March 2020. And it was about those sticks to check you in the nose, okay? And Netanyahu had a press conference saying that he brought to the country millions of those sticks, as if he was, the one who saved us, okay? So I drew him like a bomber, okay? And he's full of himself, watching us from above. So this is another way. So let's say that this is a good example to explain that the fact that once your cartoon is online, it does not belong to you anymore. Because let's say a Netanyahu supporter would think that I did a good cartoon, because actually he saved us, okay, in his opinion. But those who understand and know who I am, understand that I'm criticizing. That the way I drew him is somehow such ridiculous. I'm not glorifying him, okay? So it's all in the eyes of the viewer, okay? That was Bolsonaro on the policy of dealing with COVID-19 in Brazil. So I drew him as the big statue of the saint above Rio de Janeiro. And he says, why have flights been canceled to Brazil? Here every day it's Carnival de Rio, okay? And I sent it to a Brazilian friend of mine who agreed with me, okay? So just Bolsonaro supporters can understand this cartoon as something positive, because they don't understand. I hope it was
great to interview.
a good experience for you. I hope so.